A child wakes before dawn, the fire is dying. Red embers pulse beneath the ash like a heartbeat buried under the earth. Around him, people sleep. A man with a scar across his shoulder. An old woman whose hands no longer close completely. A mother curled around an infant too small to survive alone. There are no walls, no bedrooms, no doors, no last names. Nothing we would recognize as a family. And yet when the child opens his eyes, he already knows. He knows whose voice means safety. He knows whose hands will share food with him. He knows who belongs here, and who does not. Most people assume family is the oldest thing about us, that it arrived with us, built into our biology, waiting at the very beginning. That is not what happened. Family was not discovered, it was invented, and the story of how it was invented is one of the strangest stories in the history of life on Earth. It begins not with love, not with loyalty, not with anything warm. It begins with a problem, a biological catastrophe actually, one that nearly made the entire human experiment impossible. To understand it, you need to travel back roughly 8 million years, before cities, before farming, before language as you know it, to a landscape of open grassland, dust, and wind, where a creature called Homo erectus was doing something extraordinary, growing a larger brain, not slightly larger, dramatically, dangerously larger. A chimpanzee brain weighs around 400 grams. Your brain weighs around 1,400 grams. That is more than triple the size. And that tripling happened in almost no time at all by evolutionary standards. But here is what nobody tells you about a large brain. A large brain is a liability, at least at first, because a large brain takes an enormous amount of time to develop, and that creates a problem that changed the entire trajectory of human history. A foal can walk within hours of being born. A chimp infant can cling to its mother and move within days. A human infant cannot hold up its own head. For months it cannot crawl. For years it cannot survive without someone protecting it, feeding it, carrying it. Paleoanthropologists call this secondary ultrashality. It means you were born unfinished. Your skull had to be small enough to pass through the birth canal, but your brain still needed years to reach full function, so you arrived in the world helpless, completely, almost embarrassingly helpless compared to every other creature of similar size, and that helplessness changed everything, because helplessness creates a demand, a desperate, non-negotiable demand, for care, for protection, for someone to stay. Now imagine you are an early Homo erectus mother, 1 million years ago. You have just given birth. Your infant cannot walk, cannot run, cannot climb away from danger. You are in the African savanna. There are predators. There is competition from other groups. There is the constant pressure to find food. And you are carrying a child who, if you set it down for too long, will die. You need help. But where does help come from? The first answer, according to anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy, was not a husband. It was a grandmother. Hrdy spent decades studying infant care across species and across cultures. What she found turned the romantic story of family upside down. The earliest form of extended human care was not a mother and a father raising children together. It was a network of females. Sisters, aunts, grandmothers, close female companions, sharing the burden of raising children who were not always biologically theirs. Hrdy called this cooperative breeding, and the evidence for it is everywhere once you start looking. Human females are one of the only mammals on Earth who live for decades after they stop reproducing. Think about that. Menopause. From a purely reproductive standpoint, it seems like a flaw. An animal that stops producing offspring is an evolutionary dead end. Unless the animal becomes more valuable after reproduction ends than during it. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah spent years living among the Hadza, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups on Earth. And she noticed something. Grandmothers were working harder than anyone. Digging for tubers. Gathering calories. Feeding children who were not their own. And the children with active grandmothers were surviving at dramatically higher rates. Hawkes called it the grandmother hypothesis, the idea that human females evolved long post-reproductive lives specifically because grandmothers are survival machines, because a grandmother who helps raise grandchildren leaves more of her genes in the future than a grandmother who simply reproduces more. Evolution kept her alive, not for herself, for everyone else. For the first family was not what you see in paintings or religious texts. It was not a mother, a father, and their children gathered around a hearth. It was a cluster of women, sharing infants, sharing food, sharing the enormous burden of raising children whose brains refused to be born ready. But this arrangement had limits. As human groups grew, the demands on those women multiplied. More children, more mouths, more years of helplessness to manage, more protein required to feed those metabolically expensive brains. And here is where the story takes a turn that nobody fully predicted. Males started to matter in a new way, not as competitors for females, not as dominance hierarchies jostling for position, but as providers. The shift was slow, imperfect, contested at every step. But gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years, something began to emerge. A male who stayed close to a female and her offspring had children who survived better. A female with a reliable male providing additional food had more time to nurse, to rest, to care. The pairing worked not because of love, not because of romance, because it was more efficient. Anthropologist Bernard Chapais at the University of Montreal spent years tracing the evolutionary roots of human pair bonding. His conclusion was uncomfortable for anyone who prefers the romantic version of the story. The pair bond emerged as an economic arrangement. The deal struck not in words but in behavior, repeated across thousands of generations. Stay close, contribute resources, protect the offspring. In return, access, security, a social position within the group. Emotion came later. Attachment came later. The neurochemistry of love, of longing, of grief when a partner dies. All of that was built on top of a foundation that was, at its core, a survival calculation. But here's where it gets strange. Because even with pair bonds, there was still a problem. A fundamental, almost philosophical problem. You cannot see paternity. A mother always knows her child is hers. She was there. She felt it. A father has no such certainty. For the entire history of early human life, a male investing in offspring could never be entirely sure those offspring were his. And this uncertainty matters enormously. Because natural selection rewards investment in your own genes, not someone else's. The solution humans arrived at was one of the most cognitively demanding inventions in the history of social life. Social rules about paternity, not biological detection, not instinct, agreed upon norms. Cultural technologies. Marriage, in its earliest forms, was not about love. It was not about companionship. It was a system for managing paternity certainty, for giving males enough confidence that the children they invested in were theirs. Anthropologist David Geary at the University of Missouri has argued that as human cognitive capacity expanded, as males began contributing more and more to offspring survival, the social pressure to track and enforce paternity intensified. Fatherhood had to be invented, not biologically, socially. A father is not simply a male who reproduces. A father is a role, a set of obligations and expectations negotiated by a group of people trying to keep their dangerously helpless children alive. And once that role existed, once it had a name, a shape, a set of behaviors attached to it, something extraordinary became possible. Language arrived. Or rather, language and kinship arrived together. And together, they changed everything. Here is something worth sitting with. When you say the word brother, you are not simply describing a biological relationship. You are creating one. You are telling the people around you that this person has a claim on you, that you have obligations toward them that do not evaporate when it is inconvenient, that your fates are connected in a way that goes beyond this moment. Kinship terms are not descriptions, they are contracts. And contracts create cooperation at a scale that no other animal has achieved. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar, famous for identifying the cognitive limits of human social groups, has argued that the emergence of kinship language was one of the critical technologies that allowed early humans to build coalitions larger than any primate before them. A chimpanzee troop is built on personal relationships. Every bond requires constant maintenance, grooming, shared meals, physical proximity. You can only maintain so many bonds before the system collapses. But kinship language let humans create obligations with people they had never met. A cousin 3 villages away, a brother-in-law from a trading partner, an uncle encountered twice in a lifetime. The word created the relationship. The relationship created the obligation. The obligation created civilization. This is why the human family looks so different across cultures. Why some societies trace descent through mothers, others through fathers. Some practice polygamy, others polyandry. Some raise children in extended clan compounds of 40 or 50 people. others in isolated nuclear households of 4. Every variation is a different answer to the same question. How do we organize ourselves to keep these helpless children alive and give them the best possible future? There is no single correct answer. There never was. Family is not a blueprint. It is an ongoing experiment. One-year species has been running for nearly 2 million years. But here's what is extraordinary, what is almost difficult to believe when you look at the scale of it. The family did not just solve the problem of helpless infants, it solved almost every problem that came after. The pair bond created households. Households created territory. Territory created inheritance. Kinship networks created trade. Trade created alliances. Alliances created the first political units. Every kingdom, every empire, every nation in human history traces its structure back to the same invention. The idea that some people belong to each other, that their fates are linked, that they share obligations deeper than momentary convenience. Family is the operating system on which every human civilization has run, and it was built not by kings or philosophers or priests. It was built by mothers who could not put their infants down, by grandmothers who kept working long after their own reproduction ended, by males who slowly, imperfectly, learned that staying might be worth more than leaving, by communities of people who discovered that naming a relationship made it real. Tonight, somewhere in your life, there is someone you call family. Maybe by blood, maybe by choice, maybe by the slow accumulation of years and shared meals and ordinary mornings. You probably did not think about where that word came from. You probably did not imagine it was invented, that it was built piece by piece across millions of years of biological pressure and social negotiation and desperate cooperation. But it was, and the fact that it feels like the most natural thing in the world is the greatest proof of how completely the invention succeeded. That child waking before dawn beside the dying fire. He does not know that the people sleeping around him are the result of millions of years of evolutionary pressure. He does not know about pair bonds or kinship language or the grandmother hypothesis. He only knows that he is not alone. And for your ancestors, in a world that was trying very hard to kill them, that was everything, and it still is.